Hello, and welcome to JD's Longbox. I'm your host, JD. For my very first review, I'm going to cover Sun Devils. You may have never heard of this 12-issue maxi series, but since Sun Devils number 6 was one of the first comics I ever bought, and since it was one of my favorite comics for years, I wanted to dedicate my first ever comic review to delving into this story. For decades, I had only ever had issue number 6. I would pore over those pages and imagine what must have come before and what would come after. This fueled my imagination and inspired my writing for years. Finally, I was able to complete the collection and read the story in its entirety, so let's get started with the review. The story is Sun Devils number 1 through 12, published by DC Comics in 1984. The characters were created by Jerry Conway, Roy Thomas, and Dan Jurgens. The writers were also Conway and Jurgens. The book was penciled by Dan Jurgens and inked by Rick Magar, Romeo Tanghal, and Steve Mitchell. The colors were done by Tom Zuico. The story starts with Rick's son, a diplomat from the planet Wolfholm. At the start, Rick doesn't want any part of the looming rebellion against the tyrannical Sauride Empire. He believes in peace through diplomacy. But after his homeworld is attacked and his kid brother is killed in the battle, Rick goes on the offensive to bring down the Empire, and he picks up a ragtag band of misfits along the way. This includes his love interest, Anomi Zitar, the smuggler pilot Skyla, a set of clones known as 1, 2, and 3, a Sauride defector named Shakan, and eventually a scientist named Mist. Part 1. Writing. Was the main character's motivation clear? Rick quickly turns from a buttoned-up diplomat to a swashbuckling renegade. Though the character development was fairly common, it served to get the story going, and by the fourth act, betrayals and loss turn Rick from simply driven by revenge to outright suicidal. I give this an 8. Did the writer make me care about the protagonist? Rick's son's goal was simple and clear. The plot rarely meandered, but this also lacked complexity. I'm giving this a 7. Did I feel menaced by the antagonists? Danger lurks around every corner of this universe, and the Sauride Empire has ever-increasing control over the star systems. The Sun Devils and their allies are constantly overmatched and outgunned. This gets an 8. Were there interesting twists and turns? There are a number of plot twists that I didn't see coming. The character motivations were more complex than I had originally anticipated, and they turned out to be more gray than simple black and white. Most of these surprises actually disappointed me, though. After years of seeing the team in all their glory, the story just didn't end the way I was expecting. I'm giving this a 7. Pacing. The story was wrapped up in just 12 issues and still managed to have some side adventures, interpersonal drama, and shenanigans that you would expect from an ongoing title. I'm giving this a 7. Dialogue. The dialogue was distinctive enough to tell the characters apart. One interesting effect was from the clones, 1, 2, and 3. At the beginning of the story, the three of them spoke as one, actually completing each other's sentences. Throughout the story, they were separated and began to develop different personalities. By the end, they spoke for themselves in their own unique voices. I'm giving this an 8. Were the characters interesting? For the time this book came out, the characters were very interesting. A dashing lead character, a feline human ingenue, the clones who can only be told apart by the color of the tattoos on their face, the hulking space pirate woman, and the lovely scientist who can turn her body into mist. These characters lived on in my imagination for 35 years now and inspired everything from my childhood play to the adventure stories I write now. This gets a 9.5. Part 2. Pencils. Does the style match the story or genre? Dan Jurgens has been a favorite of mine since I first read his work on Superman. Along with Jackson Joyce's work on Action Comics, he holds the definitive look for Superman in my mind, so I was pleasantly surprised when I looked back at Sun Devils to see it was penciled by Dan Jurgens. The artwork was a good fit for a space opera with mostly human characters. I do feel the starship designs were lacking in imagination, and there wasn't a variety of different space aliens, mainly humans, Saurides, and Anomi, the human-feline hybrid. I give this an 8. Line art. The artwork was clean and had lots of details, with just enough sketchiness to imply grit and danger. I am going to deduct a point, because the last couple of issues really declined in quality. They felt rushed and at times sloppy. This gets an 8. Character designs. All the characters had a distinct silhouette that fit their personalities. Rick's turned-up collar and messy hair, Skyla's height, along with her headband and cigarette, and her 6-foot mane of white hair. I think Mist, with her white face and streaked black hair, is one of the most striking character designs I've ever seen. They even came up with a way to identify the clones with different costumes and tattoos. This gets a 9. Costumes. The heroes were usually found in matching spacesuits or uniforms. Nothing groundbreaking, but they did little details like headbands, slicked collars, and an open shirt to help define the characters, even in matching clothes. I'm giving this a 7. Props and scenery. The spaceships and guns didn't have any interesting design for a space opera. I'm giving this a 6. Panel flow. Dan Jurgens uses all the tricks when laying out a page. Rarely do we get a standard block of panels. Instead, he will leave open panels, overlap close-ups with wide shots, create long vertical panels, and in book number 5, when the Sun Devils sneak through the foundation of the Emperor's Fortress Palace, he uses the joists and pylons of the building to create frame lines to guide your eyes throughout the page. Since this is one of the first books that I learned to read comic books from, I would say that the panel flow moved smoothly and was easy to read. This gets an 8. Is there good storytelling? Dan Jurgens defines characters by their body language and their costumes. When we first meet Rick's son, he's in a blue suit with his hair slicked back. He's part of the system. As he starts to realize diplomacy may not work, his hair gets a little messy. Then as he goes on the offensive, he changes to his red uniform. By the end of the story, his uniform is in shambles, which mirrors his inner strife as he holds on to the last thing he has left, revenge. Dan Jurgens also uses panel breaks to show the passage of time within a shot. And he gave us what I would consider one of the most powerful pages in comics. When Anomi's pet Pook is killed, the background and colors drained away until we turn to this 2-page spread of Anomi and Pook surrounded by black. I'm giving this a 9.5. Part 3, Inks. Since there are 3 different inkers over the 12-issue arc of this maxi series, it's hard to pinpoint exactly what tools each inker used, but it looks like they all use brushes and screen tone, aka Zipatone, and other screen textures. Does the style match the story? Rick Magyar started inking this story with issue number 1. His lines are slick and comical, though lacking in detail. With heavy brush lines and a cartoony style, he sets a happy-go-lucky tone for this budding team. Romeo Tanghal took over from issue 2 to issue 4. Just as the team is formed and setting off on their first adventure, his art is iconic with smooth, clear lines and heroic figures. But the majority of work was provided by Steve Mitchell, covering issues 5 through 12, where the action heats up and the Sun Devils mount a daring raid to kidnap the Emperor himself. Mitchell's style is more detailed and darker than the others. It's rough and gritty, and in my opinion the best match for Dan Jurgens' art. These differing inking styles may have had to do with scheduling or trying to find the best fit, but they also resulted in creating a visual arc, starting comically, moving into more heroic, and then finally turning gritty. This gets a 9. Could the images stand alone in black and white, or does it need color to make the images clear? Of all these inkers, Steve Mitchell uses a lot more blacks and more shading with zipatones and other textures. But in the end, all these guys were working to produce art that would be colored, so I'm giving this a 6.5. Part 4, Coloring. Does the color set the right mood? Whether showing the bright world in primary colors, or mystery and intrigue through the use of tertiary colors, Tom Zuiko's colors pop off every page and set the mood for an exciting space adventure. I'm giving this an 8. Is there clear definition and separation? Zuiko will often choose to fill in characters with a solid color instead of detailed coloring of every item. But his layering and choice of contrasting colors creates depth and separation, allowing you to easily pick out background details while drawing focus to the foreground elements. Zuiko really shows us that sometimes less can be more. This gets a 9. Does the color enhance the overall experience? The intense colors, enhanced by printing on the glossy Baxter paper, is what made me fall in love with Sun Devils. The bright red uniforms, splashes of yellow, and accents of blue make for striking pages to look at. Zuiko also changes up the color palette from time to time, switching to cool blues for a moonlit beach scene, or he skews the colors completely into purples, pinks, greens, and oranges during scenes of danger. I'm giving this a 9.5. This adds up to a total of 160 points. This book gets an 80%. Final take. As you can see, this comic was a space opera, playing off the success of Star Wars, and while it shares many similarities with the swashbuckling sci-fi adventure, It doesn't copy, homage, or satirize Star Wars like most other works will. However, much like Star Wars starting with Episode 4, I was introduced to this world right in the middle with issue number 6. All those years of wondering what happened in the earlier issues and what would come next fueled my imagination and ultimately left me disappointed when I finally got to see the resolution. This comic will always have a special place in my heart. But once getting to read the entire story, there were many little disappointments, from the direction of the story in the final act to the rushed artwork. It's far from a perfect comic, but it's something I will go back to from time to time for the bright colors and interesting characters. If you enjoyed this review, be sure to like this video, and if you're looking forward to my next review, be sure to subscribe. If you've had a chance to read Sun Devils and you had a different experience, tell me all about it in the comments. Until next time, I'm JD, and this box is closed.